isn't it? Now, today, you are in for a really special treat. My guest, affectionately known as the Doc, is a Melbourne icon when it comes to sports medicine and his role in the AFL media. Can you guess who this might be? Just stay with me a bit longer. He claims to make the best cheeseburgers in Albert Park and have a massive boy crush on edgy pop singer Pink. But this guy is iconic for many other reasons. He's born and bred in Geelong. He was a school athletic superstar who never really cooled his heels long enough and went on to represent Australia in the steeplechase in the 1976. I said sex then. It was 1976 Summer Olympics, 1982 Commonwealth Games and the 1981 World Cup. In his spare time, he managed to collect a few degrees and honours in medical science, as well as a Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery, later travelling the world to study sports medicine and then set up a practice in the 1980s, or I reckon it could have been about 79, but he'll tell us about that later. Many things led to numerous others anyway, and it was back in 1996 when fellow legend Eddie McGuire rang to say, "I'm doing the footy next year on Triple M." Does that sound like Eddie McGuire? Anyway, we want you to be part of it. He went to go on to become a big personality in footy media until 2018, so still keen to get behind the mic. He's with me right now to talk about what it feels like being, you waited for it, Dr. Peter Larkins. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rae Bonney. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
So excited. This is going to be 2 hours of absolute gold.
You know, like in a marathon, don't go too hard too early, Rae, because it's a long 2 hours, so make sure you spread your effort.
Not long enough, as I said. Now, I always like to start with how we know each other, and the fact is we don't really know each other.
I met you like 11 minutes ago.
That's right, and I was doing a bit of research for the show a few weeks ago, and I was thinking, who's great to have on the show? And you came up in a search when I was searching around people in Melbourne who were talking about men's health. And then you came up, thought, I know that person. I was, listened, watched and observed this person over many years, and I thought, why not give it a crack? And I was so thrilled that straight away, true to testament of everyone else, what a kind person you are, you responded straight away and said, yes, would love to come on the show.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm in that connection, again, social media, what an interesting sort of world we've come into with the good and the bad that social media brings, but it allows people to connect. And I guess in the world that I work in now, having started really from a sports medicine in the traditional sense where it was about sport, and therefore it was more about performance and, competitiveness, and not just footy, but, I've come from a whole background of sports. But as I've morphed into a different type of person over the last decade and a half or so, when I looked initially, my life was about high performance in sport and how to get the best out of yourself in life and what athletes do to be the best they could be. And I used to give talks about, the Olympics and top-end sport. But then I really thought, well, really, and my patients as they got older and followed me as I got older, was really about high performance in life. And so I thought all the lessons I'd learned from my time at the elite athlete end, not only personally, but dealing with the Australian teams and things that I had the opportunity after competing to be, management partly in some of the teams, and all the things that athletes had to get right to be the best they could be. I said, why couldn't you be that just in your own neighbourhood or be in your own person? So whether it was nutrition, whether it was sleep, whether it was mental health, whether it was recovery, which is a big thing, looking after yourself. And of course, it sort of coincided, I guess, with that becoming a big thing in the world where emotional health and mental health now is talked about daily. It's the field that you work in, of course, Rae, and so it's got a profile that it never used to have. There's still a stigma there about some mental health issues, but at least some people are prepared to put their hand up. So apart from still doing the traditional, I call it orthopedic medicine, which is the sport and exercise medicine clinical work that I do, I've sort of in the last decade or so been doing quite a lot of talking about high performance in life and what I call asset protection, which is your asset is your personal health and how to look after that. And health across all the things that it means, spiritual health, emotional health and physical health.
It's interesting that you talk about the uptake of mental health or well-being in the more integrated sense. My feeling is that we have come a long way in opening up conversations, but the languaging and literature that we've created along the way, I feel is so haphazard that it can be very, very confusing and conflatist when, we're using, terms that are supposedly mean the same things, like mental illness as opposed to a mental health challenge, or mental, ill health. It's all just very, very conflicting. So I think we've still got a long way to go until we can minimise that stigma via that language and literature.
Yeah, I think it means so many different things to different people, and medicine's notorious for trying to label things, give diagnoses and labels, and there's a lot of things that just don't have labels attached to them. And so the whole concept of emotional health or mental well-being, just to use that another non-specific term, Rae, there are so many different shades of grey when it comes to the way that people have their own emotional or mental health challenges. And so trying to sort of have diagnostic boxes like psychiatrists used to have when I did my medical degree in the 1970s, that doesn't exist anymore. But I think just the awareness that life has changed and the sort of stresses of life and the things that people try to juggle, and often your personal health gets put aside because people get caught up in that terrible roundabout of career and family and children, and we've all done it. But at the end of the day, if you're not healthy, you can't do a good job with what you have to do for other people. So if you don't, that's why I talk about asset protection not being your house or your car or your holiday house. Your asset is you.
Well, without you, there's nothing.
Well, I say that to companies all the time. One of the things I enjoy is that some of the corporate work I do, where I talk about workplace performance and how to get the best out of a. And, people talk about, I'm too busy to exercise because I'm running this massive multinational company. I'm in Sydney tomorrow and then I'm in Perth the next day. And the problem is if you fall over, everything falls over underneath you if you're that person. So, and it's the same when you're running a family and, and other things like that. If you're not well, then, I'm too busy to exercise because I look after my kids. Well, no, you have to look after yourself so you can look after your kids. And so, the examples go on and on, but my point is that everyone's got their own way that they're challenged in finding time to be selfish. And selfish is a negative term in a lot of people's minds, but selfish means looking after yourself. And I talk about the positive value of being selfish, having that 20 or 30 minutes a day to exercise, which we'll talk about later on perhaps, or just to have that relaxed time, that breathing time, that brain space that you need to have. So
I just want to go back to what you were talking about in the corporate space and people. And it just ignited a memory in me about 13 years ago. I was sitting with this amazing man, Peter Mason, from a company called Gemina, and they manage our gas and electricity infrastructure here down the east coast of Australia. And, it was about 13 years ago, and he drew this risk model on the wall. He said, this is our risk model. And, he drew the layers of risk, assets and, finances and all that kind of jazz. He said the thing that's missing off here is people. Nobody's recognising that people actually should sit at the very top of every corporation's risk model, and we're still not seeing that yet. And I've seen his work sort of develop and evolve over the years. And, now we are starting to recognise that without people's health and well-being being at a good level within organisations, you really, really are very vulnerable. Your bottom line is anyway.
Yeah, well, most businesses do rely on some sort of personnel component. It's not all about IT and machines and, the robots, even though they're now...
Somebody's got to drive the robots.
Yeah, got to train the robot. So we've got robots in our operating theatres at Epworth Hospital, but there's still the surgeon needs to be giving the information to the robot. It's not going to take over. But you're right, the personnel side of things is the thing. There's so many companies... And I think that's probably been, there's a lot of negative things that COVID has brought to the world over the last 3.5 years, Rae. But I think one of the things is the emphasis on workplace environments for people, with being forced to be away from the workplace and working from home. But also the importance of employee health because of the stresses it did bring out. So that concept that COVID, has emphasised the need for people to have their time to look after themselves in a time when there was some isolation from work colleagues.
Like everything though, Peter, sometimes the pendulum swings too far in the wrong direction. And, what we're seeing now in workplaces that there seems to be almost a sense of entitlement that people don't need to come to the office and people can continue working at home. So people that live with social anxiety, perfect scenario. Economically, it's a much better proposition, public transport, petrol, environment. However, that human connection, and you mentioned robots, we actually still need that human connection.
Yep.
And I was listening to a great podcast with Russell Brand and Eckhart Tolle yesterday, and Eckhart Tolle's talking about how, our realities have really changed. We used to have, the reality that is the now, and the reality that was, our past and our future, which are really just figments of your imagination. But he talked about the virtual reality that we're now experiencing through our screens has become another dimension as part of our evolution that we really haven't caught up to yet.
No, I mean, it got thrown on us pretty quickly, so there were people that adapted quickly and people that didn't. And it's interesting, I mean, through that time, the medical and healthcare sector was under the focus a lot. And being in the healthcare industry, it was, you're at the front line of a lot of the information. I was very fortunate, Rae, that there was at no stage that I not working at all. So there was times when I was working 5 hours a week. So when other people weren't allowed to leave their house, I mean, medical practitioners were allowed to still do certain things. And so, through that period of time, particularly, late 2020 and to 21, I was doing very limited hours compared to my normal working week. But when I did get back to doing a bit more work over the last 12 months, there are so many patients that I see that have been giving me their experiences where they're trying to blend the work at home time with the back to the office time. And some of them are struggling with that because you talked about entitlement, and they quite enjoy working from home. And I think we found with technology that some companies can do quite well on that. But there are other companies that need the people back in that, and people are not wanting to do it. So I as much as I'm talking to people about their sore shoulder, I'm often talking to them about their environment from work and health, and that's part of the way that I go through it. So it's interesting getting the different perspectives on people that are, some are working 2 days, some are working 3, some are still working full time at home, and it's interesting because medicine, it's a bit difficult to do that when you've got to be seeing patients and operating on them. It's a bit hard to do that from your lounge room.
But even like online study, psychology, which obviously I'm particularly wedded to, being 100% studied online without any collaboration, interaction, that builds creativity. And I think that's where we're going to miss a lot with so many people working from home and not having that physical connection where we do create things together.
I mean, using an American term, I know, but they talk about the water cooler conversations in the workplace and how that can generate ideas, and you can exchange ideas, and you might be working on a project together with a teammate on whether you're an accounting firm or whether you're a marketing firm. But when you work in isolation and, at your kitchen table on your laptop, you don't get the water cooler conversation,
you get one dimension.
And everything, how many Zoom meetings can we have in a day, like, people were having, and we were doing telehealth as doctors and things,
yes.
But a number of the company HR people and their creative people said you lost that interaction where people could sit and have a coffee and talk and then be talking about the project they're working on. Then they'd get inspiration because you're actually having a face-to-face talk on that thing.
Yeah, but it's interesting, though, telehealth space, and I turned to a bit of telehealth, but was very fortunate during COVID that, being a first responder, I was able to get out. But we saw a slight reduction in male suicide during COVID, and, we put that down to many things, but one of them that men all of a sudden had access to health support that was private. They could do it in their cars. They could go sit in a park on their phone and access health support for the very first time. So I think, there's been remnants that is still going, and that's a great thing.
Yeah. I mean, I said there are a few positives out of the COVID. It was pretty tough in a lot of ways for industries like hospitality and travel, and we can go on and on about.
But also amazing. You talked about agility before, and I think about the IQ and EQ. We miss the AQ, which is the agility quotient. That human beings are so incredibly agile and adaptable.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're in an era where technology. Both of my kids started at new schools at the beginning of the homeschooling time. So it was a real challenge when they were both going to a new school for the first time, didn't know people, and then they had to homeschool. Yeah. And so you really lost that social connectivity and that interactive stuff that schools have. So there was another challenge, and many parents listening will identify with that. Yeah. And having to have them at my place on their own quite a lot with me, it was a real challenge for me, who'd been out of school for a long time, Rae, to be suddenly dealing with a child. I had a primary school child at the time. Yeah. Now I've got a 12 and 15-year-old boys, but back 3 years ago, of course, they were a lot younger and going into year 7 into year 5. And
that transition time, especially for a boy going through lots of different, physical and mental changes, and that peer transitioning.
Yeah.
How was that?
And well, really challenging because I grew up in a very privileged era. I admit that at Geelong, it was just, I have nothing but happy memories of growing up, and school and sport and family connections, and it just seemed. I thought everyone lived like that. I didn't, and then as I've gotten older and did medicine and did psychology and psychiatry, I realised there's a lot of stresses out there. But for me, my kids didn't have sport. I mean, listeners know there was no community sport going on whatsoever. So that's why part of my practice changed so dramatically. There was no netball, there was no hockey, there was no football.
No ACLs.
There was no ACLs. So the surgeons didn't, they weren't working at all. My surgeons, who I've worked with some really high-powered surgeons in Melbourne, and they were sitting home doing Netflix and playing crosswords for 7 months, did not work. So at least
brains turned to mush.
At least I was seeing patients during that time, because if you remember, the 4 reasons we're allowed to leave home during that time. So one was to go shopping.
Yeah.
One was for to visit a doctor if you needed to. One was for essential work, and the other one was to exercise. So exercise suddenly was in that top 4 things that the federal government and everyone, the health ministers were. And so it was amazing that it showed the value of exercise. And suddenly every exercise path around where I live was tripled number of people. So we're supposed to be isolating, keeping away from people, but you couldn't help but bump into people because it was fathers pushing the prams.
And all the COVID puppies that were attached.
The family connectivity thing was going on there. But there was no competitive sport. As you say, there were no ACL knee injuries. We weren't seeing the skiers with their dislocated shoulders. And so it was quite a different time medically. But the fact that people were still exercising, and again, as a so-called essential worker, I'm not sure how essential I was, but I was still seeing people with their sore knees and sore ankles because they were walking so much and doing extra. Yeah. So I was still allowed to go into my office. And as I said, I was very lucky that I could get out of the house when there was this 5K restriction and 8 p.m. curfews and all that sort of stuff. It was a very stressful time for people.
Oh, yeah. And we will talk about it a little later in the show about your ASOS. I think it's ASOS.
My ASOS.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. You've been reading up on me.
I do my research. I love my research. But, alcohol being one of those things.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how many alcohol-related injuries were sustained during, COVID, where unfortunately a lot of people turned to that.
Home deliveries of alcohol went through the roof, of course, because, you can leave it at the front gate. But, and I wanted to go back to the suicide thing as well, because it was interesting. There was a thought in my mind about, when the isolation, of course, was a problem for people that didn't have family or didn't have partners or didn't, and that was an issue. And we saw that with some of the nursing homes and the tragedies and the sad things where families couldn't connect. But there are other options where couples who traditionally spend a lot of time apart during the week, suddenly they were 24 hours a day under the same roof, and you wonder whether that was a stress that...
or it actually brought people together.
Well, it could work both ways, couldn't it? Yeah. So if you had your partner that was allowed to visit, if you were in a relationship that wasn't a marriage, but the marriage is suddenly the husband was going to be home 24 hours a day and the wife was going to go out for a walk, please, get out of the house, get away from me.
Oh, gosh, yeah. In my position, I got to hear all those stories about people who generally could slip under the radar and all kinds of things that all of a sudden were quite visible.
Yeah.
Speaking of visibility, actually, I was having, I understand that you're at the Albert Park Hotel yesterday.
Do you?
I do. You weren't flipping your famous cheeseburgers, were you?
No, well, not at the. I mean, I live in that sort of region of Melbourne, and it is it's one of the. It's a very social connect. I mean, I'm all about social connectivity, Rae. So it's one of the 5 cornerstones of healthy living, social connectivity.
Well,
and I'll expand on that. But the Albert Park Hotel is a very socially active part. In fact, Albert Park's a wonderful suburb, and. Yeah, I mean, I might have walked past there. I didn't actually spend any time sitting in, but I had friends who were there. And last night I cooked for my boys. So, so we went. When it was a very big sporting Saturday in my house yesterday, starting from 7 a.m. and finishing seriously at 6:30 p.m. So it took about Dad's taxi. It was really active yesterday.
Well, it sounds like your days are very reflective of your entire life. One human being able to pack in so many accomplishments and achievements. But I did receive a lovely little text message yesterday afternoon at around 3:00, I think, from another very good friend of the show and who's become a very dear friend of mine as well, Rae Chamberlain.
Now I know. I know.
Rae,
are you listening? Rae, come on. Well, Rae, what were you doing out having, Rae was looking at his elegant best. He was dining and having a business meeting and we briefly saw each other, yes. Yeah,
so we collaborate a lot, and he was speaking at an event last night, and so he likes to, ask me what my thoughts are. Like, what can I use, Rae? What can I use, about men's health? But yeah, Ray's been on the show, and
I knew that, Rae.
He's a great man.
Yeah, no, Rae. Of course, I know Rae through the AFL connection over many, many, many years, and we have.
Well, was it partly you that he's able to do such incredible gymnastics on the field?
I take no credit for his fitness work, but I have seen, Rae has kept himself in very good shape over the years, and often see I don't know what dog he's got these days, but I used to see him walking his dog along, and I'd give him a toot when I was driving past him, and one of the characters, and but he does some great work as well with what he's doing, the off-field work that Rae is going. We've crossed paths a few times in events as well. Foundation work, which is just fantastic to see people putting back in things like that, especially when they've got a profile that they can use their profile for such positive things.
Yeah, he was just actually talking because his event's coming up in a few weeks.
Yes, it is. It's March the 3rd. Yeah, oh, gee, I got that right, Rae. I was listening to you at the pub, wasn't I? March the 3rd, yeah.
But yeah, there are so many people out there, being so selfless. And I was thinking about, and I don't mean to bag or discredit anyone, but, quite often I do invite people on the show who, I think might have something to say, who just don't ever get back to you. Just don't ever say, no, I can't. But, I was listing all the people, George Danikian, Steve Carey, Simon Madden, Tim Watson, Jackie Lambie, like lists of people who've come on this show like you.
How did I get here then? George Danikian. Now there's a legend.
Now,
George is a close friend of mine. I hope George is listening in or die this morning. I hope out on their walk at least. So George, again, another icon of of the media world. But there's someone who's been very active off field as well, and and he's worked with soccer and things like that. So George is a local and has occasionally been in Albert Park as well.
He's Port Melbourneian.
He's a Port Melbourneian, but he comes across to the Albert Park side when he feels like he wants to move into the next level.
But like you, another person, not enough on-air hours to do justice to the achievements and accomplishments and the contributions to our world. It's really, really inspiring, and I don't think we hear enough about it.
No, I mean, and it's, as I said, the opportunities now for people to do things. And as I said, whether it's promotion through social media and events, I mean, now that events are back again, because, there was that terrible sort of hiatus of 2.5 years where, from a corporate point of view, from a charity events point of view, I mean, even at the hospital, we have a couple of really important fundraising events for Epworth each year. Which obviously nothing took place through that time. And so these opportunities for people to have their charities like Ray Chamberlain has and the stuff that George does and other people, that are doing great work. I mean, you talk about hospitality with your son before. I mean, but, there's a great, movement amongst all those restaurants and hospitality people. They do some fantastic work, again, in the background for things. And so now we've got events happening again. It allows people to socially connect again, and which is a great part of that personal health, social connection.
And that's one of the reasons I love this show so much, because I get to not only meet and learn from people like you, but we get to showcase and, get this out into our communities. And I know I've got people tuning in today from the Middle East, somebody from Canada's tuning in, somebody from the US who just contacted me this morning to say, hey, really want to listen to this show. So
yeah, well, I saw when you promoted today, one of my old professors from Vancouver even responded to you, Professor Jack Taunton, who's an absolute legend in the sports medicine world and was the Olympic doctor for Canada. And I spent time at UBC, University of British Columbia, in my postgraduate study time. Vancouver is such a great city, so I knew that he was even taking notice of the Rae Bonney shows going worldwide.
Going global. My friend Mark Brown, who hopefully he's tuning in at the moment, and he's probably rolling his eyes going, Rae Bonney, please do not challenge Dr. Peter Larkins. Every time Mark Brown rings me with an idea, I just challenge him back, and he cries often at the hands of me trying to advocate. But do you know what? We're almost half an hour into the show, which means we're coming to our very first break, where we're going to play some music. Now, you've packed so much into a very short life. I don't know if the 2 hours is going to do justice to you, but we'll give it a go. So this is the time when I prepare to play our very first special guest song request. So the submission rules were, and I'm not sure if you were listening, no swearing and nothing over 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So
okay, I know where this is going.
All of yours,
I know where this is going, Rae.
All out of the lines. So, my friend, you've been a bit penalised, and you lose half of one of your songs at the end of the show.
Can't you beep out some of the lyrics? No? Oh, I'm sorry.
So I apologise on behalf of Dr. Peter Larkins and his potty mouth. But part of the game, because I love a game, I give you a cryptic clue about one of your songs and you have to guess because I've mixed them all up. So they're not in the order you may have given them
The order
to.
wasn't important, no.
No. And then you might tell me what the meaning behind the song that you've chose is. So here goes for the first cryptic clue to help you announce your first song. The colour of a cloud that's described as a phase many people experience in the early stage of drug or alcohol addiction recovery, or a syndrome associated with the honeymoon phase and feelings of euphoria. The colour of the cloud might have to do with the artist.
Is that a question for me? Or
Yes, you've got to tell me what the song is. Probably didn't explain that very well, but so you have to say, okay, so think about the artists. And
I'm trying to remember the songs that I nominated first of all on a Sunday morning,
okay.
let alone cryptic.
It may have something even to do with the colour of the shirt that you're wearing.
Well, I'm going to say it's probably pink that we're going
Correct.
with, right? Because you're wearing pink in your part of your ensemble. So
I'm sure
I'm wearing fuchsia, by the way. That's fuchsia.
Fuchsia.
It's not pink. But this is pink, and this is what an absolute star she is.
Yeah. And so what's the song about?
Well, this is a song about her life. It's off her most recent album that she put out, and it's called All That I Know, and it's really. I mean, she does a lot of controversial songs. A lot of there was so many I could have chosen, but I just like the lyrics because you got to listen to these, and the listeners will know this song.
All right, everyone. So listen very closely to these lyrics. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC, and don't go away. Welcome back. The time is 34 minutes past 10, and you're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC with Rae Bonney and Dr. Peter Larkins. He's an Australian doctor, media personality, and a former Olympian, if that's not enough. Peter Larkin.
S for special, yeah. So Larkin was the original spelling in the Irish Times. So we're Irish, from Kerry and Limerick and Tipperary. My mother was a Whelan, my dad a Lark. But Larkin, or O'Larkin, was the original one. But Larkins, I always say, that's left off all the time. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine. So I always say the S is there for special. But
it's right, because I know it's Larkins, and then it's easier to say Larkin because I'm lazy. But
there's more in almost said in the phone book. Has anyone got a phone book anymore, right? In the phone book, when I grew up in Geelong, there was Larkin, lots of them, but there weren't many Larkins, and we were the Larkins. Yeah. And we lived in Larkins Lane, named after my grandfather. So our property, my rural property that I grew up on, was named after my grandfather.
There you
so
go.
I think you just name it yourself in those days. You put the sign up saying, "Oh, this is Bonnie Lane," you know.
Yeah. Well, there's not that many decision makers back then about street names. But you know, one of my trademark questions that I'm very well known for is this, and I'm going to ask it to you: what does it feel like being you today, Peter Larkins?
What does it feel like being me today? Well, I mean, it's I'm always surprised when I started out in my career and I look where I am now. To sort of, I feel sort of proud that I've been able to have an impact in the field that I chose to go into. A field that no one was going into when I started out, Rae. So sports medicine wasn't even a name that any medical practitioners would have heard of in the 1970s when I said I wanted to be going to sports medicine. Well, no one had ever heard of it. So today I look back, and the fact that I get to talk about what I've done, whilst I'm not trying to hear and, you know, wear my hand out by patting myself on the back, I'm glad that I get to sort of perhaps encourage people to follow dreams, because that's what I did. I mean, I was encouraged by every consultant at the hospital at the Alfred where I trained to do everything but sports medicine, because they said there was no future in it. It wasn't a career. It wasn't even a term they'd heard of. Why don't you become a heart surgeon? Why don't you become a lung specialist? You know, at least be an orthopedic surgeon and do knee replacements. But I felt there was a lot more in the field that I could go into to help people that wasn't surgical. Now, I do spend 30% of my time in an operating theatre with my surgeons.
So you don't actually cut people up?
Well, I'm an assistant surgeon, so sometimes I do all the sewing up and preparing and, we do. Yeah, look, sometimes I'm doing that, but I'm not a primary. I'm like the co-pilot on a jet. You've got the pilot and the co-pilot. So for many, many years I've done that. But
it was a question actually sorry to interrupt, because it's a question that somebody asked me. Can you ask Peter Larkins, what is it like being in an operating theatre, like in terms of, the graphic nature of...
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, orthopedics is sort of the carpentry and the engineers of the medical.
Pretty rough, yeah.
It's yeah. You got to I mean, it's interesting without going off track, but a lot more females are doing it now than they used to because of the equipment getting more powered and the robots and things. But traditionally, it was a men's career. And women did plastic surgery because you'd work on hands and tendons and sit down and still wear your makeup. And I don't mean to be denigrating, but that's orthopedic surgery. Well, women can't do that because they're not strong enough. They can't throw the hammers and saws around. Because it is pretty graphic. Having said that, one of the great advances in the field over the course of time when talking about it in my career has been the so-called minimally invasive surgery, MIS, or what people would call keyhole surgery or arthroscope surgery. So when I talk to medical students or medical audiences about the changes I've seen in my career, one of them is this concept of this less blood, less, but still for a knee replacement or a hip replacement or some of the big, there's still, without scaring people over their breakfast on a Sunday, it's still. But, when you say, what's it like? Well, I mean, you sort of do it. I mean, you don't know any different. You either cut out for that or not. I mean, there's a few nurses and a few med students who faint the first time they come to an operating theatre to watch us work. You sort of cut out for it or you're not, because orthopedics, as I said, there is, you are looking at inside a joint or a hip, and there's blood and ligaments and veins, and sometimes there's a spurter that hits the roof, no, well, I'm being half serious, yeah. So, but, it's one of those things where I've never turned an eye or felt that I didn't feel like I could do it. Now, I don't do it 5 days a week like my surgeons do, because I'm really a consultant where I see people with a sore shoulder and I tell them whether they need surgery or not. Most of the time I'm sending them off for their physiotherapist. They're doing strength work, they're doing rehab, they're doing posture training. They might be getting their ankle strong if they've got a weak ankle. So I reckon 70-80% of the work that I do is non-surgical, but it's still orthopedic, because orthopedic simply means joints and muscles and bones and things, you see.
And being sports medicine now, because you're so accomplished and have such a good reputation, you see people outside of sport as well? Well,
yeah, my elite athletes start at about age 50 and go to about 95 years of age. So when I talk about sports medicine, it's exercise medicine. So the federal government term for our specialty, so we're a fully fledged specialty in Australia. It wasn't when I first graduated, there was no specialty, but it is now available, so people can do their medical degree and then specialise in sports and exercise medicine. So the key word's exercise, because that's a bit of our theme today about how you look after yourself and and the things we'll talk about later on. But so the people that I see are people that are exercising. They're not. Yes, I do see some elite athletes who are on the way to the Olympics next year and maybe playing elite support, in netball and things like that around their hockey, but majority of my patients are people that just want to go for their walk. They're playing golf, they're playing tennis with their friends 2 or 3 times a week, and so they hurt their shoulder or their knee. And as I said, my waiting room's full of 50, 60, 70-year-olds who have got worn out knees, and I'm keeping them active.
Wow.
Because my message to people is stay active, because that's where your health comes from. This is where my corporate health work comes in, is about how to look after yourself and the things you've got to get right. Part of which is you've got to have exercise in your life for all the benefits that exercise
I think that transition into retirement as well, which we're now starting to actually give a crap about too, leads into the sort of the stuff you do in preparing people, to be fit and agile when they reach that age.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I get people sitting in my room. Let's say I've got a 7-year-old lady and she's got a pretty worn-out knee and it's a bit sore, and she was told she needs a knee replacement. The X-ray looks pretty rubbishy, and she comes in, and but she hasn't done all the non-operative things that I think we do. So I say you've got to get your strength back up, you've got to get on the right medication, you've got to see your physiotherapist, you've got to stop doing this or that, and I said, you've got to look after this knee because you've got it for another 30 years. And they go, she goes, what do you mean? I'm 70. And I go, you're going to live to 100. She goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, because there's no reason if you look after your health, you have your health checkups. So whether you're a female or a male, you have your health checkups. You find out, I go through the list of things that kill us, so apart from getting hit by a tram or a bus out on Whitehorse Road here, we got 20 the most common causes of death in Australia. And so if you can there's checkups for every one of them. So whether you're talking about skin cancer, bowel cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, heart disease, all the things that we know are the common causes of death, if you have your health checkups, you won't die. And so I said, obviously, if you don't die, you're going to live. It's the most logical, silly statement I make every day to people. But my point about my work these days is I'm telling people how to live to 100. I've written a book. It's called 100 Ways to Live to a Healthy 100 and Beyond.
Right. That was a question right at the end of the show about your book.
But it is healthy 100, right?
Yep.
So it's got to be healthy 100, because people say, I want to live to 100. And I say, no, we're not talking about being in a nursing home on an oxygen cylinder sitting watching with a rug on your knees. We're talking about being on a trip in the Bahamas when you're 95 or out on your boat or skiing in the Alps. And so the concept of my 70-year-olds and I'm trying to get them healthy and fit is because, and you talk about retirement. See, my dad was almost made to retire at 60.
Yeah.
Now, financially, if you're going to live to 100 and you're retiring at 60, this is such a prehistoric retirement age that we have for people. There's a lot of IP going on in people that are 65 and 70 years of age. And we've had this workforce issue, of course, with COVID, where nurses are coming back to work, doctors are coming back to work, and they retired 10 years ago, but they want to work.
Yes.
So, one of the chapters in my book is have a good financial planner. So that's one of the tips on how to live to 100. Because
has your book been launched?
No, it's being launched this year.
Okay.
It got slowed down a little bit with a few issues last year, Ray, and I've actually written too much. So I've been told I've got it. So I actually had 107 tips. There was lots of things like,
Is there too much, or does it just make it volume 2?
Well, it's a second book.
Yes.
There, so you're ahead of me a little bit there. Okay. So I've actually started the second book, but the first book is in editing phase, and it's called 100 Ways, and it's called The Art of Aging Youthfully. Oh. So the concept is that we can all live to 100, but you want to be, the secret of youth is to die young, but to leave it as long as possible is what I say. So you want to leave it as long as you die young. At 90, you're still feeling young. In other words, to translate what I just said. So the issue comes down to my athlete population of people that are staying active, because exercise is medicine. It's therapeutic. Your body's the best pharmacy. It's a pharmacological factory. Every day, your body, when you go for a walk this afternoon, it's not just about your heart rate going up and using your muscles. Your body actually produces chemicals that are the same chemicals that your pharmacist gives you to treat your blood pressure, to treat your cholesterol, to treat your anxiety, to treat your sleeplessness. Your body actually makes all of that. You're a mental health person. You understand.
That's right. Our oxytocin, our dopamine, our serotonin.
So one of my chapters is you get your dose each day. Yeah. So your dose, DOSE. So it's dopamine, it's oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins.
Yep.
And people will probably heard some of those words. So I talk about getting your dose, because all the pharmacology things that, if you talk about mental health and anxiety, so dopamine and serotonin are two of the really important neurochemicals that our body makes. Yes. And so when you exercise, you're getting those. So my push now about people with, their retirement is you better look after yourself, because if you do what you're supposed to do to look after yourself, you're not going to die.
Absolutely.
You'll eventually die, but you're going to die healthy. You'd rather be healthy to 104 and then die at 105
and happy
than have 20 years of ill health because you didn't find out that you had a medical condition.
Those happiness hormones we were just talking about.
Happy hormones, they're called.
So important. People don't realise that they're so easy to ignite. They're really easy. You pick up a baby, go for a walk, change the sheets on your bed and get in it. It's like, bang, it's off. But and I spoke to you on the phone about this when we first started, when we first connected, that, I was just recently out in the field talking to men between Queensland and New Zealand. And, this man said to me, Rae, how do you diagnose depression? I think I might have it. And I said to him, how much are you drinking? And he said, I might have half a dozen a night, maybe on the weekends more. I said, do you understand that the moment you ingest alcohol, that starts depleting your dopamine, your serotonin, your oxytocin, your endorphins, all rapidly deplete. So you're drinking that much, you've probably got none of those things. So what are you going to feel like? You're going to feel anxious and depressed. And I think we're still not there, with our public health network asking those questions. What are you putting in? What are you ingesting that might be affecting the natural production of things in your body that cause you to feel a way, rather than, you're not sleeping, not eating, not socialising, that's depression, let's put some more medication into your system.
Yeah, not surprising, one of the biggest sections of my book is nutrition, and it's nutrition for your gut, nutrition for your brain, nutrition for your joints, nutrition for your mental health.
All connected.
And all the foods that either can interfere with the body's ability to work well, and foods that produce inflammation in your body. And you say, I'm sore all over. So there's things like that which are part of healthy living, because as I said, we go to a pharmacist to get a tablet for our high blood pressure. You should go for a walk for your high blood pressure. We go for a pharmacist to get something for our high cholesterol when you walk, or any form of aerobic exercise. I'm talking walking, because most people can walk. If you can't walk, then you can do other things in a seated position, but it's cardio. So the three components of exercise are cardio, strength, and stretching or flexibility. But cardio is the one that's got the biggest research. But strength training, I'll talk about later on.
Yes.
Strength training's got incredible research now. People say, strength training, it's about making my muscles look big. Yes. I don't want to do that. No. Strength training, yes, it can give you muscle tone. It can help you with balance and stability and prevent falls in nursing homes because you do some strengthening. But strength training has been associated with much lower risk of diabetes, lower risk of heart disease, lower risk of mental health issues. So there's a lot of chemicals released even during a light strength training.
At my generation of women as well, in our mid-50s, where
bone density.
Exactly. Strength training is really, really pushed.
Yeah.
But somebody actually, because I did get a whole bunch of questions phoned in, one of them was, talking about medicine.
Yep.
What is your views on vitamin supplements?
Well, yeah, I've sort of got a short and a long answer. The short answer is a supplement by definition is something you take when you're deficient in something. That's the definition of a supplement. If you go to Oxford or Webster.
Yeah.
So if the body likes to eat, nutrition is the ideal way to get the body. Whoever designed this body did a pretty good job. And they didn't get the ACL right in the knee, maybe, Ray. But your body absorbs vitamins through good nutrition. However, there are circumstances like when I was at uni and living in halls of residence and eating food that had been reheated 3 or 4 times, or sharing a flat with other people and you eat pretty badly. And some athletes need extra vitamins, but you can only fill a petrol tank to the limit and the rest is going to spill out. And so there's a lot of vitamins that you don't need to take because they are simply the richest source of vitamins in the world is the New York sewer. Right, because the US spends $27 billion a year on vitamin supplements.
Yeah, and because it can be detrimental to your liver function and stuff.
Well, there are certain vitamins. There are a lot of vitamins that are just excreted. If they're water soluble, your kidney just flushes them out. So you can be taking all these. You can't store certain vitamins. As I said, I've got 80-litre petrol tank. If I put more than 80 litres in it, it's just going to spill out. So it's the same with nutrition. But there are, folic acid, for example, in pregnant women is an extraordinarily important one. Iron deficiency in people that are perhaps true vegetarian and they don't get enough heme iron from their nutrition. They need iron for their blood cells and to prevent anemia, certainly in athletes who are vegetarian, for example, and won't eat meat. So there are supplements that you need to take. I mean, vitamin B, certainly for stress. So I think, if you don't want to spend, there's a lot of very soft research on supplements, but there's some supplements in the examples I just gave, or when people who are really rushed and perhaps not eating as well as they should, because nutrition, natural food is full of vitamins. That's why we eat fresh.
So if I eat a really balanced diet, like I track the nutrition value of all of my food, so I know that I'm getting, I'm trying to get enough of everything. I don't really eat anything bad, but for some reason I like to take fish oil tablets every day. Okay,
so if you look at the research on fish oil, it's been done for decades. It's pretty mixed, but it's probably one of the positive supplements that you can take. So fish oil I get asked about every day in my practice for joints because people say, oh, God, I've heard fish oil is good, like as if it's going to lubricate my joints. But fish oil has been shown to be good for dementia and memory. It's been shown good for cardiac, for skin. And again, it's a natural product. It's got to be deep. It's got to be the omega-3s and omega-6. So fish itself is still better. I mean, deep sea, cold water fish like salmon, that's the ultimate. You're going to get your fish oil. So why wouldn't you eat some fish rather than paying money at, I won't mention any pharmacy brands, but, you can spend a lot of money on supplements.
No,
so fish oil, is one. I mean, zinc is often used for immune system and to try and, because we've been very conscious of our immunity over the last 3 years and people say, oh, my immune system, I need to boost it up. So look, I think within reason, if people taking a broad-based multivitamin to cover off any deficiencies they might have, because your body will recognise whether it needs it or not. You need to speak to your doctor about any particular things you might have relative to anemia or, as I said, or folic acid requirements in pregnancy. But athletes generally, they don't need a lot of supplements because your body is the best absorber of vitamins, and that's why you need the correct advice on nutrition. Yes. I mean, if you've got a strange diet, you might need to get advice as to where you're deficient. Irons,
like a FODMAP or something.
Yeah, and iron's the good example of that. But spending a lot of money on supplements can often be a waste of time. But I think people need to speak to their nutritionist or at least their general practitioner in case there are specific examples that need to be done.
And just a little disclaimer here, we're not on this show to diagnose or prescribe here. They're just ideas that we're flinging around, so take it as you will, or make an appointment with Dr. Peter Larkins and get it.
We'll talk about, as I said, the body is the best pharmacy. It makes...
Or buy the book.
Buy the book 100 Ways, yes.
100 Ways.
Healthy 100 and beyond.
Well, I will certainly be promoting it on this show. You might give us some copies to
Well, you'll have to be at the launch. I've got so many people wanting to come to this launch, so I've got to get the professional to get it out. But as I said, I was accused of, because I had 107 ways. So I've got topics on, you name it. There's topics on red wine, because red wine is healthy, but is all wine healthy? I've got topics on Belgian chocolate, because we know people say, chocolate's good for you. I've got topics on why we sleep.
Yes.
So it's a book where
we like to believe stuff like that,
Yeah, the red wine and chocolate gets everyone every time. They go, now you're the sort of doctor I like to talk to. You're talking, because I've got a bit of a reputation for having a glass of wine from time to time.
Yeah.
And red wine, Pinot Noir is the healthiest red wine in the world, because it's a stressed grape. So growing Pinot Noir is very hard to grow. It's a grape that has to survive all sorts of climate things, so it produces its own chemical protectors inside. And there's a product called resveratrol. It's not so much about antioxidants anymore, but the value of red wine is some of the anti-aging and things like resveratrol. So a stressed grape, and even stressed vegetables and fruit, they because you often go to the market this afternoon and you want the best looking apples, or the ones that have been grown in the hothouse. They've had such a privileged life, as I say.
The chemicals and everything.
And they are not the healthy ones. You want the ones that have been out in the organic orchard, and they've got a little bit of a speck on, and the birds peck them a bit there, and you put that aside. But they're the ones that have survived the process. They're the ones that have the highest nutrition content, and they're still healthy, and they're the ones you should be buying. So there's sort of my book talks about how to shop, and talks about food labeling and salt, and so there's a lot of things in this book that
salt's good for you, isn't it?
There's so much salt that we get there's invisible salt in so many things. I hope you haven't got a big salt shaker on your kitchen table tonight, right?
I am the mother of a chef,
but the chef's cook. No, but the problem is not the problem. So I'm sorry, because I know your son's a chef, and I know where he works, which is a great restaurant, by the way. But there's salt in the cooking, so you are getting salt. It's not that we don't get salt, but the people that sort of put a lot of extra salt on, that salt is associated with some problems of kidney load and high blood pressure in certain people. So you got to be careful.
Bloody love it though.
Chicken salt.
No, it's not that. Salt would be probably my.
Well, there's a reason they put all those sort of snacks on the bar at the pub. It's to put the salt in them to make you have another round. Yeah,
and also the bacteria that gets passed
through
the
fingers.
I know. Look, let's not go into it. I knew this was going to happen, that I wasn't even going to ask you any question that I had on my list. So apologies to the audience. I'm going to segue somewhere, because I really, really want to cover this. You mentioned your dad just before. And in the break, we were talking about raising boys, and you said to me, I had one of the most cherished, amazing upbringings, and I wish, we were talking about raising your own boys.
Yeah.
And you see some of those things coming back. So what was it like being raised by your dad in particular?
Well, that's a really great question, because my dad was not a very hands-on, affectionate dad. So I had this, my mum was the matriarch of the family. So I grew up in the rural part of Bellarine Peninsula. My dad had 11 in his family. My mum had 11 in her family. So we were surrounded by aunts and uncles and family events. It was just the happiest time, and we lived on a farm where there was a combustion stove. So the kettle boiled 24 hours a day. The scones and the bread was being made after Mass on a Sunday. People would always come to the Larkins kitchen. So I just had this social awareness that my mum was she controlled everything. So they sat at opposite ends of the dining room farm table. So they were both at heads of the table, not one at the head. But my dad was a very quiet achiever. He worked long hours, but he was just that typical Aussie, hard-working guy who provided for his family, and he left for work at 4:30 in the morning. But
what did he do?
Well, he was a heavy machinery driver, so left-hand drive machinery, so road building and council machinery and things like that. So he specialised in now we're talking 1950s and 1960s here, right? So pretty ahead of his time in terms of some of the fancy equipment that was coming out for left-hand drive. But then he was the taxi that took me to all the athletics and took me to cricket. So my memory of my dad was
How many siblings do you have?
I have a brother and two sisters, all older than me.
Were you the only athletic person?
No, not at all. So my brother was 12 years older than me. So my recollection. So I started racing against him when I was 3 years of age, and he used to bring trophies home when he won cross country at school, and I'd race him down the driveway of our farm, and he'd let me win. So I thought I was a really good runner, because here I am at 3 years of age, and I'm beating a 15-year-old.
Still have all the baby fat going on.
Oh yeah, but he let me win. So then I'd have the trophy on the sideboard next to me. So my brother, and he was he got a full blue at Melbourne University. My brother's a Rhodes Scholar and a Churchill Fellow and a nuclear physicist, and he went to MIT, and he was captain of Oxford when he was a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, my brother is a genius.
Geez, your mum and dad, Shazam.
Yeah, and both my sisters were very high achievers. My sister specialised in teaching deaf children, and she was the principal of a school that specialised in deaf children. Then she worked for the education department. My other sister was an office manager for a large firm, doing all bookkeeping and accounting. So
you kind of pale into comparison a little bit, really.
Oh, I do. Yeah. No, look, I'm just, they're the achievers. As I said, my brother. People say, oh, he's not a Rhodes Scholar. Yeah, my brother. I mean, he's not a rocket scientist. My brother was a rocket scientist, and I said a Churchill Fellow. So I always laugh because So I grew up but they were older than me. So my closest sibling was 10 years older. So I had two sisters. So at 8-9 months of age, I was walking, because I had one of them on each hand running me up and down the farmhouse corridor. So I had to walk, because my two sisters, they were like full-time babysitters for me. So I got running very, very early. But my brother was a reasonably good runner, represented Australia at the Australian Universities Championships. He was captain of Oxford running team, captain of Melbourne University. Never went to the level that I did. I got one thing that I covered him on. I actually went to Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games and captained Australia and things like that. So I've got one thing that I've got my brother Frank covered on. But academically, he was Deputy Vice Chancellor of Melbourne University, head of the professorial board at Melbourne Uni. I mean, he's still, the list goes on. I can keep talking about him. But whereas my dad drove trucks. Yeah. And my mum worked in the woolen mills, deciding all the quality of the fabric. So in Geelong, we had a very strong industry of wool. We make beautiful merino wool in Australia, as you know. And my mum was in charge of checking all the quality after it was woven, before it went off to Italy to have the Zegna suits and the Versace suits made. My mum would have to check the quality of that. So she was not a wool classer, but it was just after it was woven into those huge big rolls that they used to put on the ships and take across to make. So I always used to laugh when I'd see all these incredible Italian suits with all the expensive prices on them. That wool came out of Geelong, and my mother used to be, the one that sent it. So we had all the offcuts. All my clothes were handmade when I was 7 and 8 years of age. Because
your mum made them?
My mum and my two sisters. I know the old patterns used to be on the floor. They used to buy the pattern. My sisters made all their clothes, because that was what you did in that time. So I always thought everyone had custom made clothes. I got a real shock when I went to uni and I had to buy jeans and buy clothes. But it was very lucky that way. But my dad, back to him, I mean, he was just there. Yeah. And I was determined. I love my dad, but he was not a very affectionate person. He didn't know how to do that. With my own boys, I've made a real effort, Rae, to actually, we're okay to hug each other. It's okay to kiss each other, because it's something that, and they do that. So, but growing up, it was just an uncomplicated life. I lived on a farm, went to school, played sport. There was, my mum and dad loved each other. They were the quintessential couple that, got engaged when they were sort of 18 and 20 years of age, and were together for 60 years. Wow. And it's just that sort of incredible story, which is unusual these days, of course.
Well, yeah. Even then, people stayed together about harmoniously was the other.
And I guess I was saying in the break, I talked about how people are going to this sea change or country change now, because they say they want the kids to grow up and get the grass under their feet and know what a sheep looks like, or a lamb or a cow. I mean, that's what I did. I grew up on a property where we had all that stuff. And it's interesting now, I see that families are trying to get away from the hustle and bustle of metropolitan life.
Well, COVID allowed that to happen.
COVID allowed that to happen, and some haven't come back. Some have found that it's not their cup of tea, and their business, because there's been a bit of a swing back. I know this from some of my real estate friends, that the people that sort of abandoned Melbourne or wherever they were living, in that 2020-21 period, and when they could, now they're 2 years down the track going, oh, maybe this is not such a good idea, and maybe country life isn't the life for us.
Or ran away to Queensland and went, oh, I didn't realise there'd be so much flooding.
Yeah, and it's so hot all the time up here, So it hasn't always been the joyous change of life for people that it has. But I think just getting back to the simplicity about my boys is because it's screens and it's it's the lack of things that have done, and I try to get them back to some basic stuff now, because I think 12 and 15 they're sort of to me, it's just such an important part of life.
How much of your childhood do you bring forward into the way that you parent?
A lot. I mean, subconsciously or consciously, I don't know, but a lot. I mean, as an older dad, I've still tried to connect with them because the fact is I'm a lot older than some of the dads that have got 12-year-olds, but I'm still at basketball yesterday and basketball training on Wednesday night, and I mean I'm still reasonably fit myself. So
you look very fit.
Yeah. So I mean I can they don't come out for a run with me. Because I tell my 12-year-old he can't keep up with me, and he looks at me, you can't keep. That's why you don't come running with me. I try to.
How often do you run?
I walk. I don't run or walk. I walk. RALK. So walking is a blend of running and walking. Yeah. I talk to my patients about this for many years. So when I go out, I do something every day if I can. Work will get in the way of that as it gets a bit busy in the winter time. But I do anything from 30 to 60 minutes of walking every day. So walking is where you might go out and walk for 10 minutes, then I'll run for a minute, walk for a minute, run for a minute, walk for a minute. So I've got a knee condition that doesn't allow me to do a 10K run in 37 minutes like your son did this morning. Yeah. But there was a time when I used to I was running 110, 120. I used to run for Box Hill, which is just up the road here, and that was my club, and I was running 120 Ks a week. Now if I get out, if I get out 30 Ks a week, plus some strength training, plus some flexibility work, plus some Pilates, I mean, it's a really program, some of which I can do in the house.
Can we just integrate that fun fact to everyone? Peter Larkins was the first little athletican to...
Is that a word?
I just made it. I make
Never
up words.
heard it. It is. I like it.
It sounds good.
I like it. Athletican.
Athletican.
So what you're suggesting, little athletics I've spoken about as being such a grounding thing for people. It's unique around the world. It's all around Australia now. But the first little athletics centre ever was in Geelong at John Landy Field. John Landy was a great family friend of ours. Of course, he died and was governor of but I trained at Landy Field. My dad helped build Landy Field as part of his construction work that he did. My dad helped build the Great Ocean Road as well. For people that know the Great Ocean Road, going down to Lorne, where I'm going next weekend.
Well, thank you, Frank Larkins, for that.
Frank Larkins, Francis Edward.
Wow.
But the point about the athletics was that when my brother was running in the afternoon athletics, a chap called Trevor Billingham was one of the main administrators and official of junior athletics in Geelong, because my brother was still running under 14 or under 15 when I was young. We used to line up on the back straight, so when the athletes were running the 100 metres up the front straight, and the starter would say, "On your marks, get set." So myself and a couple of my 6-year-old friends, we'd get down on the back straight, and when the gun go off, we'd race each other. So Trevor was watching us do that, so he got inspired watching us say, "Why don't we have a competition for these kids? Because they're missing out. There's nothing for them. This is the next generation of runners." So that was the origins, truly, Ray, in 1962 of Little Athletics. And so I was the first little athlete ever. Geelong, all the Little Athletics regional centres have got numbers. Geelong is number one because it's whether you're in Albury or whether you're in Wonthaggi or Bairnsdale, you'll see your Little Athletics has got a regional number. Yeah. But Geelong is number one because it was the origin.
How many are there now?
There are hundreds and hundreds. Yeah. I think last time I heard, and at one stage I was very much more connected to athletics than these days, they had something like 380,000 registered people doing little athletics. But another point about it is a lot of athletes who have done well in other sports started in little athletics. It's a great grounding because you run, you jump, you do relays, you do shot put. On any given Saturday, you might do 5 or 6 things when you're an 8, 9-year-old. And I remember talking to Kirsty Marshall, who's one of our most famous aerial skiers, fantastic. She did that. Kathy Watt, who won the gold medal in the cycling race, she did little athletics. And so now at the Olympic team, there's no athlete that's been in the Olympics for about the last 20 years that didn't start in little athletics, where I was the first one ever to make an Olympic team. So I started in athletics. But a lot of little athletes have got grounded. And then when in little athletics, they're grounding from their learning their skills about running and jumping and teamwork and all that, and then they go on to another sport. So it's been a great contributor. And Trevor Billingham, who's no longer alive, was given many awards for getting so many kids on their way in a sporting career. Yeah. And John Landy Field is still going.
Wow.
Great stadium.
Was he a mentor for you?
He wasn't a mentor in the, he was just a role model, I would say more. A mentor was a guy called Ralph DeBell. Ralph DeBell won the gold medal in 1968 at the Olympic Games in Mexico City and set the world record for 800 metres. And he was at Melbourne Uni with my brother. They were the same age. And Ralph went on to go to Harvard and get a very successful finance career. But Ralph DeBell was sort of my mentor and inspiration because he was a guy that it was real. He came to our house and used to go down to Brimley and do the sand dune running with my brother on the weekends and things. And so, and next minute he's winning a gold medal and a world record. I go, he's a real person, you know, because often when you're looking at role models in life, you think they're unattainable. You think, I could never do that. You know, whether it's Tiger Woods or whether it's Roger Federer or, you know, but when you meet them, they're actually real people who have just set no limits for themselves. And so I realised with Ralph, whereas John Landy was more of a figure, a bit older, it's just that I was fortunate enough to meet him many, many times and felt so lucky that I was running at John Landy Field. And because he ran for Geelong Guild, which was the same club that my brother ran for. I ran for my school team in Geelong and then eventually for the university at Melbourne Uni and then to Box Hill very quickly. Yeah. But John Landy ran for Geelong Guild and I had a lot to do with him because he became such an interesting character, you know, in his after career and, you know, obviously at Governor of Victoria. We used to do laps of the tan, so John became my patient and so I used to go into Government House around the Botanical Gardens. I'd meet John, we'd do a lap of the tan and then have breakfast in this huge big reception room. There's only two of us with all the staff at Government House and I'd be sitting at a table would seat 40 people and there's John and I looking over the gardens because he'd invite me in for a cup of tea and breakfast afterwards because I was helping him get, this was John when he was in his 50s and I was just a young sports medicine doctor, but he got some medical concern, I won't say what it was, where I had to help him out recover from it, part of which was taking him for a walk to build up his fitness. There you go. And he was in his 50s at the time. We're going back, 20 years.
Yeah, well.
Or longer.
Now, your area
more than 20 years.
of running specialty is steeplechase.
Yeah.
And somebody said, what is that? I said, well, it's clearly not running after churches. So.
Oh, that's that now. So can I tell you a story about the steeplechase? Again, being lucky to be an international sport, you get to meet some really, really cool people. And across my career, going to the Olympics, and in 2000, I was at a private dinner with an athlete some people will have heard of. He was sitting at the table with me, and we all got to have a photo taken with him. We got to have a private chat with him. He was a sort of reasonably well-known guy called Muhammad Ali.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him.
No.
So my most treasured photo of all the people that I've crossed paths with and got photos of myself, in the days of selfies, but these were cameras taking the photos. But in 2000, I think we definitely had mobile phones in 2000. My most treasured photo was myself and Muhammad Ali.
Wow. He
was a guest of Anthony Pratt. We were at Richard Pratt's apartment in Sydney. He was out for a private dinner during the Sydney 2000 Olympics. And he's chatting to me, and I got introduced to him and by the person who hosted me, and he was saying, this is Peter Larkins. He's, represented Australia in the steeplechase. He looked at me and he goes, you look too big to be a jockey. Yes. And so not churches, but he was joking. Despite the fact he had severe Parkinson's and was getting a little bit of Alzheimer's at the time, his brain wasn't so bad, and he knew exactly what he said. You look too big to be a jockey. And I thought, that's very clever. Because the steeplechase, of course, is one of the original distance running events where you jump the water jump and you jump the barriers, and it's 3,000 metres. And in the original times, it used to start in the stadium in Greece. They'd go out and run around the countryside and end up back in the stadium because it's a 2-mile race.
Right.
Now it's all within the stadium.
Yeah.
And it's, but it was one of the original Olympic events because it involved going out and jumping in the fields and jumping puddles. That's where the water jump part comes in, because it's for those listeners, it's the distance. It's 3,000 metres is the distance. And I got into it because I was a good hurdler at school. Yeah. And so I really was an 800-metre runner who could hurdle. So it was a combination of a bit of distance running and knowing how to hurdle. And suddenly this steeplechase event, I saw it once. And I go, I can do that. And as a junior, it was a 1,500 metre, not a 3,000 metre. So I just started doing it when I was 16 years of age, and by 18, I was on the verge of my first Commonwealth Games selection in the senior distance.
Was that always in your mind as an objective to...
Never. No. I've written in the book about mentors for myself, and one of the mentors I had was Alan Barlow, the coach of Box Hill, just up the road here. We were in the studio. And I was already doing well as a junior runner, and I represented Victoria. But I went to Alan to coach me when I was, I must have been about 19 years of age. Prior to that, I'd been getting some advice from another less known athlete called Ron Clark. Now, Ron Clark was pretty famous in Australia. Right, exactly. So Ron Clark I'd met because I was getting sponsored by Adidas, the shoe company at the time. And Ron I'd met, and I didn't have a coach. I'd just come up. I'd only been in Melbourne a year. I came to university when I was 17 years of age. I never lived away from home. I couldn't believe what was happening. I turned up at Monash and there's marijuana everywhere. And Albert,
no tea and scones there.
And Albert Langer was the very vocal political activist at Monash in the 1970s. I'm going, God, I'm just a boy from the country. What am I doing here? But I was training myself. My coach from Geelong obviously wasn't up here. But eventually I got onto Alan Barlow, and he started training me. And he'd already seen me run as a junior, and he knew I'd won a couple of schoolboy titles, and I was now in senior because I turned 18. And he said, you could be running the Olympics in 2 years' time. And I thought he was delusional. I've written in the book, I thought he was just trying to make me feel good. Well, can I say bugger me on air? So bugger me, 2 years later, I was selected in the Olympic team. So he said, why are you setting goals to be the best in Victoria? Or the best in, why don't you set yourself a goal to be in? And I said, because I'm just me. I'm just a bloke from Geelong. He said, you should be setting a goal to be an international. And to be 100% Ray, I never thought that was what I'd going to do. Because, it's sort of almost like conceited to say, I'm going to run for Australia.
Well, it's very humble, isn't it, in that, you don't have all those barriers to ego to sort of get through to.
Well, I think if you put that pressure on yourself as a young age, you probably burn out and you don't get to do it. So I never put that pressure on. I just wanted to be the best I could be on that day.
Because I was kind of curious.
And it just evolved.
Because clearly you have, academic ability as well. So back then when you were a growing boy, going through puberty and adolescence and peer and all that kind of stuff, to get to that elite point of sport, how were you managing academically as well?
It's another balancing act for sure. I mean, I didn't do as well at either of them. I don't think I ever did it as well at athletics as I should have, because I knew that academic things were important, and I never did as well academically.
Did somebody tell you that, or you just felt it?
I felt it. I must say, look, I went to a school, and back to Alan Barlow, my mentor, he always said to me, Peter, your medical studies come first. Forget about your athletics. If you're running late or you're tired, don't come and train, go and study. So I thought that here's my coach.
So medicine was always on your trajectory?
There's another story behind that. Where you stop distracting me, Ray.
I told you that we needed more time.
Can I just finish the Alan Barlow story? Because Alan was such an incredible mentor, because he made me feel that study came first. And my brother, who was the academic ahead of me, remember 12 years older, by the time I was 11, he was a Rhodes Scholar heading off to Oxford. And his parting words to me were, make sure you do well at school while I'm away. Because he actually went away, he didn't come back till I was 17, so he was away for my whole puberty years. So I didn't have an older brother around, and I had two older sisters and a dad who didn't really talk. He never mentioned birds and bees, let alone discuss it with me, right? So I was really on my own between 11 and 17. Very naive guy. But my brother, my school I went to, CBC, was a very strong, great sporting school, but academic. I always knew that study had to come first. My athletic career, if it was anywhere going to go anywhere, I figured I'd be finished at 26. I figured I'd be in my career until I was 60, because that's when I thought you'd retire at 60. So I was always conscious that, and I'd say this to all the students that I talk to and the kids I talk to at school, you've got to set yourself up your career. Sport will stop. It could be an ACL injury, or it could be, I had to stop international by the time of 30 because I was working in the hospital. I was working 84 hours a week. There's no way I could compete with the guys who were full-time athletes. So I always knew that academic things came, but I tried, for 9 years in the international circuit that I was on, the Grand Prix circuit, I was trying to still enjoy that, because I knew it was a privilege to be competing, around the world. I was, 21, 22, I'd been around the world 3 times. I was competing in all these events, because as I was Australian champion, I was getting invited on the European circuit to all, they're called the Grand Prix meet. So whether it was Zurich or Dusseldorf or Rome or... Were
you ever scared, like you couldn't do it?
No, because I was so naive. I look back and I think, I just did it because I was living the moment. Yeah. I sort of... I was pinching myself, because here I'm up against world record holders, and I was getting, I was in Crystal Palace in London, and then the next day you'd fly to Munich, and then the next day you'd fly to Stockholm, because we're competing twice. It was a really hectic schedule, and I was getting away from my medical studies for 6 weeks, going across, crazily competing 2 or 3 times a week, but it was life experience you couldn't buy. And the other thing, I was looking at all the sports medicine support that was available in Europe in that time. And I was lucky enough to go to East Germany and Russia, Ray. So that was during the time when the Berlin Wall was still up and the Iron Curtain was up. So I was seeing stuff that, really made my head fall off with drugs. So that's why I'm such an anti-doping campaigner, because there was no drug control in those days. So I learned an enormous amount during that time as a medical student.
Wow.
About training, having the privilege of being on the internet, but secondly, I was already saying, what can I learn about medical support for athletes? Because there wasn't any system. I couldn't train in Australia as a doctor in sports medicine. So I was lucky enough to win the first ever Sir Robert Menzies Fellowship So Sir Robert Menzies, our former Prime Minister, people will know, when he died, they set up a trust, a legal trust and a medical trust, one for lawyers, one for... I was the first ever medical scholarship. So I was able to use that to go back overseas, having had the contact, one of whom was Jack Taunton, who from Vancouver, who acknowledged your podcast or the show we're doing
He might even be
yesterday. He might be listening. Jack, if you're listening from Vancouver, I hope you're well, mate. I know you're going through some tough times. So I was able to use my contacts I'd met through my athletics to further my sports medicine career, because I went back and visited the doctors I'd met during my time at the Olympics.
Wow. That's... And people tend to say about that, oh, how lucky were you? But, there are people that see opportunities, and as you said, you're putting things logically
but
together.
Instinctively. And I often talk, and I say to kids, I just made intuitive decisions then that as you get older, you tend to analyse too much. Then I didn't analyse. I just made a decision and went with it. I made a decision not to do football in my last year at school because I wanted to concentrate on athletics, and my school was a footy school. My school has more people playing AFL football than any other school in Australia. CBC Geelong. It's overtaken Assumption College and all those other ones that are the great football schools. But I decided, but I think, how did I have the instinct to make that decision?
Well, you probably never made a decision. You just probably followed your gut.
Yeah, and I say just intuition is a wonderful thing. So at that time when I was travelling, I was just instinctively setting it up. And it wasn't that I had a plan that I wanted to learn as much about sports medicine, come back and be the best sports medicine doctor I could be. And here I am talking to you in 2023.
People to get here to my show, only, it's one of the biggest aspirations to get here.
Well, I've only been waiting 20 years, right?
I've been waiting. No, seriously though, it's I love what the picture that you're painting for people though, that quite often people say, what decision should I make? And you go, just sit there, within yourself, create some space and let your gut do the work. Because your gut is, and you'll know this, your gut is actually attached to a vortex in your brain. So when you feel something, when you feel that gut instinct, trust it.
Read my nutrition chapter, The Gut-Brain Axis.
I will be reading your book.
But I've read it. And serotonin, going back to chemicals that your body makes, the happy hormone, serotonin, that the part of your body that makes the most serotonin, it's the gut.
Yes.
It's not the brain.
It's all the biomes and
your gut, the microbiome. So back to the nutrition, healthy living. So this sort of, but decision making and clarity of thought. I look back and think, how did I know to do it? I don't know. I just did it. I just followed it because I didn't have the mentors in sports medicine. They were overseas. There was no one in Australia.
But even that growing up in space with that sort of, kind of, that not literal space that you grew up in, but space to be and develop in a way that didn't have limitations.
Yeah, but the other thing, I enjoyed what I was doing. I mean, it wasn't, like I talk to people about athletes that have got, really tough coaches and they're training, and you can't succeed if you don't enjoy what you're doing.
But did your parents tell you what they wanted you to do?
Never.
Yeah, and I always say to people, it's not your job as a parent to make your kids into who you want them to be. It's your job to help them into who they actually already are.
I know that they worked hard. They both had jobs, so I could go and get my academic. I was conscious. What I was conscious of at that time when I was 14 or 15 is how hard my parents worked, so I could go to a private school, and I didn't want to let them down. I in my mind, however, whatever instinct or whether intuition I had at 14, I knew my parents were working hard so I could get a good education. The athletics, I knew that my dad drove me around to every cross country and he waved the white flags at the footy team. He was the goalkeeper, not the goalkeeper, the goal umpire, I should say. So my dad was always there in my sport, but I always felt that I owed my parents the respect. Because they worked so hard for me to have the academic opportunity. I wanted to go to university. I didn't know what I wanted to do. When you said, I always wanted to do sports medicine, no, I just wanted to do well.
Yeah.
The medicine came later. Sport came first.
Are your parents still...
No. They're both passed on.
Was there anything either of them said to you around, validating what you've brought to the world? Did they ever...
they were such simple country folk, and I mean that in a positive way, Rae, that it's not the sort of thing they ever talked about. I think the greatest joy I got was when I was on the front page of the Geelong Advertiser and the Herald Sun newspaper making the Olympic team. I was on the front page. And that's not a boast. That was just my joy from that was the joy my parents got out of it.
And that's what I meant.
Yeah.
You remember that.
And they had a
moment.
photo of themselves
Yeah.
on the front page of the Geelong paper when I was in Montreal for the first Olympics, and leading up, because there was quite high expectations and pressure on me at the first Olympics. I didn't succeed to the level that other people thought I should have. But there's a photo, and I still have the old scrapbook, because people won't have scrapbooks anymore, but I've got the scrapbooks from that time. And my mum and dad sitting at the kitchen table at the house, where the people were going. To me, the joy was the pride that they got. Yeah. I mean, that sort of was a thing for me, I reckon. Just knowing that they had seen me succeed, and I knew that they would take a lot of pride out of that. And then, academically, they just let me do it. I think now they would know the sports medicine was the right choice for me.
Well, again,
Probably
a path that you've cut down all the bracken and the forests for all these other people to
well,
jump
I mean,
on
Australia is well known for sports medicine. I mean, we are famous around the world. We
Yes.
have. I mean, I'm a fellow of the College of Sports and Exercise Physicians. We have 140 fellows. We're 50% of our trainees are female at the present time. Every Olympic team, every national team has a sports physician attached to it. We've got the Australian Institute of Sport, which has got a high sports medicine. I mean, I look at the way sports medicine's evolved, and I just think, wow, I've seen all of that happen. And I didn't drive it, but I was the first ever solo sports physician in Australia when I
made it possible.
No, I didn't make it possible.
Maybe somebody else would have, but
I mean, I was initially a part of the original college committee that set up the training program for doctors. So rather than having to go elsewhere to train when they finish their medical degree, they can say, I want to be a sports doctor. Can I do a course? Yep, it's a 4-year. Now it's a specialist training program. And that's a great legacy, I suppose, of the way sports medicine's evolved in Australia. And people come here wanting to do our training program because they know how we got a great sport culture in Australia, clearly.
Oh, absolutely.
We punch way above our weight, of course, for any of the sports that we...
If you can override our drinking culture, that'll even be
we've got that sort of ochre culture, but that's part of what we're well known for. I mean, I go to a lot of international conferences and, the first thing they want to do is put a beer in your hand because they think you're going to drink 10 beers for them. And I actually don't drink a lot of beer, right? I'm a wine drinker.
Yes.
But, the Aussie culture, we're known to be social. And so for our sport culture and our social culture internationally, we have a great reputation. And we do well,
entwined.
as does New Zealand, of course, as well.
Now, we have missed the last break completely, which...
I thought I was going to get another song.
Well, you were supposed to have had another song and now ready for another. So, but that's okay. I did expect this was going to happen. And when you're going, no, maybe you should get another guest in, Rae, and we'll just halve the show. I'm going, can you please stop it? It's not going to be like that. We're not even going to have enough time in 2 hours. So I hate to say I told you so, but I will.
Can I have another song?
You can.
Which one are you going to do?
Well... let me give you the next cryptic clue. So, here goes. Okay. Australia Post.
Oh, Bruce.
There you go.
Bruce, what a star.
Tell me about The Boss and this song.
This is The Boss, folks. I mean, The Boss has been going, for 50 years at the top end of performing. I mean, his repertoire of the stuff that he does. I mean, obviously he's got the rocker, but this is his latest album, which is called... The album's called Letter to You. And it reflects his career, and the letter to you is to some of his departed colleagues in the industry, because he's outlived a lot of them. He got together at his ranch in America and laid down this album in the recording studio out of his house with all of his band members he's had for 40 years, the same band people. He composed the songs and then they laid them down and recorded them. And Letter to You is the title track. But it's a lot of reminiscing about his career and the people he's dealt with. And Letter to You is about some of his departed people.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
There's so many songs I could have picked. The other one, if people want to listen to another great song, the House of 1,000 Guitars. That's the other great song I almost picked for you. But this is Letter to You, which has got some great lyrics.
Oh, fantastic. What a great story behind that. When we come back...
It's a great documentary. I think it's on Apple TV or it's on Prime. And you can see the making of the album and all the fun they had, and his wife's in the band with him. It's mostly in black and white, so it's an amazing sort of documentary on the making of Letter to You. And all the songs get played during the documentary.
Well, there you go. The gifts just keep on coming, don't they? That's people you've got.
It's one of my go-tos on a Saturday night with friends. I go, so I'm going to put a letter to you. Oh, you're going to watch it again. I go, yeah, let's watch it again. It's like the Roy Orbison black and white concert. If people have got that Blu-ray on disc, that's a great concert as well.
Yeah, the big O. Well, without further ado, let's go to a letter for you, or to you.
Letter to you.
Letter to you.
From the boss.
When we come back, I'm going to pick up all the remnants of the many things that I would love to cover before we say goodbye for the day. And Paula Hogg comes on for a lazy Sunday afternoon at 12. So you're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. Please do not go. Here's the boss. A letter to you.
To you.
That was a great little thing. I'm definitely going to watch that.
Great guitars. I mean, and watch the documentary with all the guitars in his house. And then there's the House of 1,000 Guitars is one of the songs.
Yeah. Wow. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. And I'm joined by the doc, Peter Larkins, who's known for many things: speaking, writing, running, fixing, sewing, fathering, and so much more that we've soon discovered that it's chewed up time so fast. We did have a question, though, from Mark Brownie. And Mark Brown says, Dr. Peter Larkins, I noticed you have a special interest in elite athlete groups. How do you deliver sad news to an athlete that their body won't be able to peak beyond its previous record due to injury or otherwise?
Yeah, it's one of the tough parts of being in clinical practice when you're seeing people with an injury that there's no permanent cure for. So bearing, bad news to people is part of what we have to do. The reality is that the body still has weak points, and with all the advances in medicine, we talked about minimally invasive surgery and arthroscope surgery and all this new equipment that's coming along and the robots. But the design of the body hasn't changed in thousands of years. The biology of the body, a ligament's still made of collagen, and the ACL's still the ACL. And so, it's part of the psychology of being in practice, and I think it's one thing that hopefully medical students learn, the empathy, because one of the things I've always had in my entire sports medicine practice, Rae, is I've always put myself in the shoes of the person I'm talking to. Because I remember getting bad news as an athlete from doctors who didn't understand athletes. So one of the things I didn't cover off before, one of the reasons I got into wanting to work in sports medicine is because I couldn't find a doctor that understood athletes when I was growing up. Had a good GP in Geelong. It took me a while to find, and I met a couple eventually.
Yeah.
But, so I always think, what is that person experiencing, when they've got the sore foot or the sore knee? And especially if they're a talented younger person who have got an injury that's going to, unfortunately it doesn't happen very often, that's the first thing I'll say, but part of it is just being real and just saying, look, I'm not here to sugarcoat this for you. I've been around in the business long enough. If there was a solution, I'd be getting you to the best person, because parents come in with their child and say, look, I don't care, I'll go to the US if I've got to get this fixed,
Do people ever give you a hard time because they expect, because of your profile, that you should be?
No, I think people are incredibly respectful. Cool. I think I've got a reasonably good relationship with my patients. I try to get to, I don't just treat their shoulder, I treat the person, so I know what job they do, I know what their family is, I know what their expectations are. But
which is not typical of a medical person at that sort of specialist level.
But hopefully medical students, again, I used to teach medical students more than I do now, but hopefully they're getting taught. That's the biggest part, is communicating.
Empathy.
If you communicate bad news well, people accept it. If you're not a good communicator.
And it's not necessarily bad news either. Sometimes it's an opportunity to segue into something else
too.
Yeah,
so one of the things, and this, again, it's a phrase that I taught myself, because I was always told when I was an athlete what I couldn't do. You've got that sore foot, you can't do this. And my attitude is I always tell people what they can do, not what they can't do. So this is what you can do. You can train at the gym sitting down. You can do sitting down boxing. You can do aerobics. You can get in the water and do aqua running where your feet aren't touching the bottom of the pool. You can get on an exercise bike because there's not going to be any pressure on you. So I'm actually laying out plans how people can recover from the injury, assuming this is an injury they're going to recover from, whether it's a stress fracture in their leg or it might be a broken ankle or a ruptured Achilles tendon. But back to, I think Mark's question. There are times when, people just take a big chunk out of their surface of their ankle or their knee and an injury. They, might be a skydiving accident, or it might be a skiing accident. And modern medicine hasn't got everything fixed. We can't fix some things. So I really try to lay out for people how to get their pain under control and how to get their function back so they can live a normal life in terms of all their professional opportunities, and then the fitness pursuits, we design something for them. So, and I mentioned Kathy Watt before, who won the gold medal in Barcelona in the women's road race. Now, Kathy is a perfect example of what Mark's asking me about in one way. So Kathy's dad was a very strong runner. Kathy wanted to be a runner. She was an 800-metre runner. She's quite short and her legs are really strong, but she kept getting Achilles problems. And I said to her when she was about 18 or 19, and I wasn't much older than Kathy, to be honest, at the time, but I was early in my career because I got into this work. I said, Kathy, you're not built to run. You need to ride a bike. Oh, I don't want to ride a bike. Okay, you need to ride a bike. So a couple of times she had Achilles injuries over a year or two. She did a bit more bike riding. The Achilles kept flaring up. So I said to her, okay, you're not going to be able to run it. It was devastating because her dad was a famous runner in Warragul. Well, lo and behold, she's an Olympic gold medalist as a result of finding a different sport. So the bad news was you can't run, Kathy. She tried to do duathlons for a while where you run and you ride. So the triathlons obviously have the swim involved. But so I try to set a program so people, because what I say, the athletic career is short, but your lifetime fitness is lifetime. So you've got to find something you can do.
That whole thing around, and it's such a mantra of my life, work out what you can do, not what you can't do.
And it's the same for athletes.
For anything. Apply it to actually anything in your life. Now, I'm going to move us through the next 20 minutes because there's a little bit more. We've not even touched on your media career, which is one of the things you're very, very well known for. So we probably don't have to delve into it too much because most people have heard you and they know what you do. But it was kind of a very quick segue into media through Eddie McGuire, wasn't it? Ish.
In terms of the full-time work with AFL game broadcasting, it was. But when I came back from my Menzies Fellowship that I mentioned before in 1983, I straight away went back onto the Victorian Sports Medicine Committee, who were much older than me. I was only 30 at the time, perhaps, I can't remember, roughly. So I was up to date with all the information. So I suddenly became the spokesperson for the AMA and for the Sports Medicine Organisation when the media needed a grab or they needed someone to explain when there'd been an abnormal drug test on the world stage. Oh, Peter will know about that because he's So the media got to know me as the person who could do interviews. And, and I'd done public speaking at school, so I sort of wasn't shy of a microphone, as you said at the introduction. So I sort of already had a bit of a media background, and I was also then became the president of sports medicine in Victoria. So I was the media spokesperson on a whole range of issues, whether it was injuries or whether it was drug-related stuff, some of it on fitness. And Eddie was a young, up-and-coming, reporter at Channel 10. I'd known him for a while, and he used to ring me up and get information about some of the good stories he was doing. He'd want to translate it into non-medical language. What does it really mean? So Eddie, became a little bit of a help for Eddie and got to know him. So when Triple M got the first ever FM licence, because footy was broadcast by the ABC and by 3AW, that was the only broadcasting, Eddie put together a team of 8 people, got a licence in 1996, rang me up and said, I was working for the Adelaide Crows as they're a doctor in Victoria, so I was the AFL doctor for the Adelaide Crows football team. Every time they played in Melbourne, I was the doctor on the bench with their Adelaide doctor. So they'd bring the Adelaide doctor over. He said, have you signed with Adelaide? I said, no. He said, don't sign, we're going to broadcast the footy. Because Eddie knew that I was doing, and I'd already done a couple of segments on his footy show on the Thursday night on Channel 9 where I'd gone and explained some high-profile injuries. So he said, I want you to be at the games and you can tell the listeners exactly what the injury is the moment it happens. So I go, how do you do that? He goes, just tell them. Because I'd done so many years as the club doctor, I knew what the doctors are looking at when they're examining a shoulder or examining a knee, as long as I could see. So that he said, don't sign with the Crows, we're going to broadcast. I thought he meant I was going to be up in the booth talking about handballs and kicks, and I thought, I'm going to broadcast the footy, but what he meant was I'm down on the bench. He said, when someone gets injured, you're going to tell us exactly what it is and how long they're going to go out for. I said, that's pretty hard. And there were no monitors in those days, so we didn't have any video replays down there. I was just basically watching the game, and because I'd worked as a club doctor, I knew exactly what to look out for, because club doctors aren't necessarily watching the goals and the handballs. They're watching behind the play. When a player runs into another player and he gets up a bit sore and limps around, they're watching him to see why he's limping. And so that was my job. I instinctively knew to watch behind the play, because then I'd be able to see if someone was likely to be coming off. So quickly, that 96, I moved into Triple M broadcasting for the And then Channel 9 Footy Show followed on from that. And then it morphed into Channel 7 got the footy.
Did that feel like a natural space for you as well?
It felt like an incredible privilege because part of that, I wasn't just there to talk about sore hamstrings and ankles. I'd be in the rooms beforehand, and then afterwards my job would be to interview the best player from the winning side and, the grumpy player from the losing side, or sometimes the coach. So I really got to be on the inner sanctum of footy, which I loved anyway. I mean, at 6 years of age, I was in the Geelong change rooms with my uncle, who was a trainer at Geelong. That's how I learned to strap ankles. So at 6 years of age, I was in the footy rooms. But here I'm in the room. So it was a real privilege because not only was I doing the broadcasting, I was actually got to know all the players, got to know the footy managers, the coaches. So, and I did 21 years of every weekend working footy. And I was working Friday, Saturday, Sunday games and the Sunday morning footy show on Channel 9. It was a it was a very hectic, and I still had a medical practice as well, where I was looking after people during the week with a sore knee and a shoulder.
Another example of what
it was a crazy life,
do.
But it was a privilege, Ray, that no one else had ever done it. I wasn't following in someone's footsteps. I didn't, But that's I couldn't look up how to do it. I just did it on instinct.
But that's testament to your life anyway. You're a bit of a pioneer.
Do it my way. I should write a song like that.
I did just want to give you a little shout out to Eddie McGuire as well. Love or not, Eddie McGuire is just one of those amazing examples of what you can do. And, hats off to you, Eddie McGuire. You've made the world a better place, I think, personally. So becoming a celebrity, though, because, you did become a celebrity through that work. What did that feel like for you?
Again, a bit, they talk about imposter syndrome, and you're sort of looking around. And I was working with, Eddie McGuire, with Dermot Brereton, with Gary Lyon, with Jason Dunstall, Sam Newman, Rex Hunt. I mean, there were some pretty high-powered media people that I'd known through sport, and here I am, part of that team, and going to events with them, and doing photo shoots for promotions for the look, it meant, and I remember Eddie saying to me, "You'll lose your anonymity." Which
hard one to say.
Anonymity, it's one of the words that I got it right because, but it's one that I struggle with. But you lose that. Medically, I was sort of pretty well known in the sports medicine world, but in terms of the media, general public world, I probably wasn't.
People loving you.
And suddenly you're on national television, like literally 3 times a week, and being quoted during the week on stuff. Then I had a newspaper column for 8 years on the Herald Sun where I do an injury of the week, and so I'd be writing about hamstring this week and then broken shoulders the next week. So suddenly it just became full on, and so. But people were respectful because I didn't think I offended anybody, Ray. So, like, the commentators would offend because they'd say, Ray had a terrible game today, couldn't get a kick, needs to be dropped. And so your fans would then, we'd go out afterwards, especially if we were interstate, we might go out for, one drink before we went back to the hotel, and people would come up to Dermot, I don't pick on Ray, she had a really good game, what would you know? Where I never got picked on, everyone sort of would come and say, Doc, I really appreciate the fact, when's Ray's shoulder going to be right? Because I heard you say she'd hurt her shoulder. Yeah. So I actually, the notoriety or the celebrity was, I don't think I ever offended anybody. So it was sort of a bit of fun. And then, and James Brayshaw gave me a moniker called Dr. Smooth at one of the sponsors events because he'd only ever seen me wearing jeans and wet weather gear because I used to sit out in the rain and get beer and sauce spilled on me. And they're all sitting up and having their cups of tea up in their warm booth where they're broadcasting at the MCG or Waverley or wherever we were. And I'd be down, amongst the folks because that's right, to work down on the sidelines. And so only ever saw me in work gear, but we had a sponsors night about the second year that he was at Triple M, and I turned up and I had my Italian suit made with the Geelong wool, and I had a silk tie and I had my shoes on, and I walked into the room and Brayshaw goes, "Have a look at the smooth one, will you?" And when he had to introduce all the cast members from, he's introducing Sam Newman, and he says, and then has anyone seen Dr. Smooth come in? So suddenly every kid in the crowd and the players all started calling me Dr. Smooth for about the next 10 years. Wow.
So there was that merino wool as well.
Well, it was Geelong. I kept saying, James, I said, I do have real clothes. I said, you're the other one who's, and he's the fashion egg. James Brayshaw was a terrific fellow to work with too. Yeah. So great. But he
you mentioned Waverley Park. Gosh,
that was an Arctic place. Park. Yeah, but I had to wear all the cold weather gear out there. So, but no, as I said, it was, people would generally, they'd be, great to talk to. And so, but whether you went to a supermarket or you went to a shop, and then people would just say, I'd ring up Telstra and they go, "I've heard that voice before. You're not Dr. Larkins, are you?" And I'd be talking to someone in Sydney and I go, like, we listen to the footy. So it's funny, you can't hide. No.
And having such a distinctive voice as well.
Yeah, maybe that was it because, as I said, I'm really surprised still. I talk to people on the phone and they go, "I've heard that voice before. Where do I know you're from?" I go, "Oh, God, I have to put an accent, put an Irish accent back on again."
Oh, you don't have an Irish accent?
Well, I can do one if I have to because of my family background.
Now, very quickly as we can to get across a really big thing, you talk about something that's LRD, which is around listening receptor deficit that you apply to men. And this is one thing, Mark, if Mark Brown's listening, he's going, Rae, don't go him on this, please don't. But tell me about that.
Well, this corporate health work where I talked about, healthy living, the things you got to do, you got to exercise, you got to eat well, you got to have friends, you got to have holidays, have red wine, Belgian chocolate, get sunshine, social connectivity. So men's health tends to get a bit more play. Women are much better at looking after themselves. Women understand reproductive health. Well, because I think from the earlier days they get drilled about reproductive health. So
we can agree that men aren't shown how to take care of themselves.
Yeah. So I'll get to that.
This is not a genetic thing.
No, so I'm defending men in one way, but women are much better at having their health checkups because from a very early age.
This Mark Brown's going, shut up, Rae. Could we say that women are shown better?
Yes.
How to do that rather than women are better than men at doing that? Let's start that. When I talk about language and literature.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I understand what you're saying, but my point was that women, through their mothers or maybe their GPs, or from the time they, and now it's like 12 years of age, 11 years of age, my patients, because I sometimes with the athletes have to find out whether they've developed their puberty and whether they're menstruating. And so the hormonal changes take place, and then therefore they've got to have checks. And whether it comes to pap smears or with their reproductive health, whether it becomes to...
But if we applied the same level of support and showing to men and guidance to boys.
Okay, but there's a cultural thing, Rae, that I'm getting to where men know that they should look after themselves better, but there's this macho thing about the Australian male that they keep things to themselves and they don't necessarily go and get their checkups.
But who creates that?
I said cultural. I think it's a cultural thing where, and again, I know I'm on thin ice here, the breadwinner role traditionally was the men. I look at my mum and dad both work, so I'm not typical. I'm not saying, my dad was the breadwinner. My mum contributed probably equally.
Absolutely, and not denigrating the past because that's how that
But I look
happened.
at the farmers that I know and I look at the guys that are working in construction and the guys that are the manual guys, and they're just too busy to look after themselves, and they don't, and they don't eat well. They have beers.
But the why, and this is what, and I will continue challenging this, and this is when Rae Chamberlain and I were shouting at each other on the phone. That's how we talk. We have to stop talking about it in a way that men aren't predisposed to take care of themselves. They're not shown. So let's start getting upstream and raising boys in a way that, call it cultural, call it whatever you want.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in your position on it because you and I have never debated this, but the LRD, the listener receptor deficit, was a little humorous phrase that I come up with where men know that they should have health checkups. They know they shouldn't put on weight. They know they shouldn't drink too much. They know they shouldn't smoke so much. But they hear it, but they don't listen.
Well, maybe it's part of what we see as slow burn suicide in many men, especially men who've retired or they've come to a point in life where purpose isn't there. Women have an inbuilt purpose. Whether we activate that or not is another thing. But boys aren't born with that inbuilt purpose. So when they aren't given things like responsibility, that is purpose, then when they get to a certain age where their neural pathways, and you're talking, that's where I agree with your LRD, when their neural pathways haven't been yet formed, they do have this listener deficit thing. I've raised 2 boys, I know that. But recognising that, if boys' neural pathways don't completely form till they're in their late 20s or whatever, we have to be getting around that.
Yeah, I do. Look,
not just accepting the
it was meant to be a tongue-in-cheek reference, and it is. If you read the book, I talk about men have got a condition called LRD.
You know my point.
Yeah, I do, and I know where you're going. But I'm just saying that I was just meaning that men need to have the resources or have the information or be taught as well as women. But because doctors have been telling people to have checkups long before I came along, have your heart checkup, have your prostate checkup. And how often do you hear about blokes, that don't go and have their checkups, then they find they've got stage 3 or stage 4 of a disease instead of stage 1.
But free testing for men with going for a prostate cancer check only was free last year. Only last year.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be putting a price on your health. It shouldn't be free you don't go because it's not free.
But what I'm saying, women have been getting free, mammograms, pap smears for many, many years. And the barriers, you said, men are main breadwinners and they're always at work, they're too busy. When,
well, I said they traditionally were, and I realise there's a lot of women out there that are going to say...
But when do they get there? And if we don't have male-centric or male-friendly services, which we don't...
This is where the government has to look at screening and start funding screening the same way they screen.
What about some money?
It's funding. That's what I'm saying. They need to fund. I mean, screening is not covered. So if a patient comes to me tomorrow, Ray, and they say, I want a health checkup, Peter, they get on the, as I say, they get on the front foot, as I say, on the front foot. So, I've heard you talk about health, and okay, I'm 42, and look, I used to smoke, and I haven't done any exercise for 10 years since give me a health checkup. I'm very limited on what's covered for them under Medicare because the government considers it screening, whereas I'm saving the government money by finding out that someone's got early stage cancer or early stage heart disease, and I put the intervention in place, including the exercise program, which means they're not going to take up government resources. But a lot of these tests, if you're not unwell, so we spend $170 billion a year on what the government calls healthcare, Ray. I call it illness care. We're not treating health. We wait for something to go wrong, wait for the damn wall to burst, and then we try to block it up. Yep. So we should be investing money on men's health where men, and as I said, there are 20 predictable causes of men's death.
Keep going, yes.
And what we need to do is say the government needs to have, and it doesn't have to be annual, can be every 2 years, depending on your age group. We're not going to go out and blow all the money,
No.
I said that to Josh Frydenberg.
Yeah.
But when now he's not the treasurer anymore, so I can't get Josh to make the decisions.
And God bless Josh, he's amazing. I've done a number of events with Josh, and he's awesome. We will go down a massive rabbit hole here, and I'm looking at the time, 10 minutes to, and I just want to say on funding, last federal budget, $10 billion was allocated to women's health, 0 for men, not 1 cent. Yeah. So to your point, we actually need to be looking at policy, strategy and funding for men, full stop. Let's not go to... No,
this full stop, just the one full stop on top of the full stop, is men take up more healthcare dollars than women, and yet they're not getting the preventive screening funding.
No, or recognition for their risk factors. Anyway.
I stopped. Did you notice awesome. I stopped?
You did. That's amazing. But thank you for stashing with me then. That was really fun. Always fun to talk about men's health. So next month I'm back, and I have a really interesting guest actually, which has a little bit of a backstory to it. But before I tell you that, if any of the discussions today have brought up uncomfortable feelings for people, it could be anything that's triggering it at all. Remember, there is support out there. Lifeline, the number there is 131114. Suicide callback service is 1300 659 467, and of course emergency services is 000. So on the 19th of March, I'm going to be sharing the studio with a Melbourne comedian, a female. Her name is Lisa Sharp, and she began stand-up comedy at the age of 48, and she's about 55 now, which was only, about 7 years ago. And she quickly became well known in northern New South Wales for her hilarious anecdotal comedy storytelling. Anyway, how I know Lisa, I love walking and rocking as well. Every day I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I do that. I'll listen to a podcast where I learn something. I'm at Ruffy Lake Park a couple of weeks ago, and this woman approached me with her giant dog, and she said, I've seen you a lot of times and I just wanted to say hello to you. I said, oh, hello, because I'm very social. This was at 6:30 in the morning. Prior to that, I'm not a natural brunette. I'm actually a redhead. So I had dyed my eyebrows, dyed parts of my hair. I thought, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm not seeing anyone. There's Lisa Sharp. So I thought, I'm still going to engage with you. So we started chatting, and she told me about what she did, about what I do. Long story short, I'm going to see her live on Thursday evening, and she's coming on the show next month to talk about her amazing career trajectory as well, which is sounds pretty inspiring.
Good.
Before that, though, next Friday night, another great fan of the show and good friend of mine, Craig Turton, who I know as Turts, and the other night he called himself Craig. I went, who's that? Okay. So 100 Words Mate to Mate, they're a charity, they're a men's health charity based on a legacy of, men who have experienced suicide. And it's they their vision is about how to reduce risk factors that contribute to poor health for men and boys. So next Friday night, the 24th of February, at 6:30, there's a place called Puss and Mew in Nunawading. It's a gin bar. And I went there Friday night just to scope out the place. Fantastic. It's in this bloody factory, or used to be a factory.
You're saying you went to a gin bar and you called it research, Ray, did you?
Well, I don't drink either. Sorry. Oh. I drank water, so there you go. But amazing. You would not have picked this place at all. It's full on a Friday night. Get down there. But anyway, next Friday night is a ladies' night that this men's charity group are putting on to discuss men's health. It's something that's become quite, on my speaking circuit, has become a really big thing, speaking to women about men's health. It's just, I don't know why I have not done more of it before. So you can get online, just look up 100 Words Mate to Mate, and you'll get through to the tickets there. $50 will get you drink on arrival, finger food, a DJ, and door prizes, including me as a speaker. And we've got a panel as well of really interesting guests to talk about their life experience as well. So you can win a night for two at the Yarra Valley, two $50 athletes foot vouchers, which don't know how far that's going to get you for a pair of runners, is it?
Pair of socks.
And a few other things, but it's, if you want to come along, either message me on anything social media to find out, but it'll be a really good insight into not so much about what happens to men, but how we can create better environments that support good mental health, well-being, and taking care of oneself in that men's health space.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the women. So on May the 4th, we have our men's health lunch at Epworth, which I'm the MC for.
May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you. And the audience there is a lot of the supporters of the hospital. It's a big fundraiser. We have it every year. Didn't have it obviously during COVID time, but it's on cardiac health this year again. And we've got Martin Hiscock, who's one of our top cardiologists at Epworth Healthcare. Oh, right, yeah. So Martin will be speaking about men's heart health, but I talk generally about men's health and all the things. But the audience gender spread is probably 1/3 women at that, because our foundation, the Epworth Foundation, that runs these big events, is primarily women that run the foundation, and a lot of the wives and other people come along to this. So I always say that when I'm emceeing this, I'm talking to the women in the audience, because they've got to take the message home to the LRD blokes out there that aren't listening.
Yes, that's right.
But that's May the 4th at Epworth, which is a great, we do a different topic every year.
Yeah.
And last year it was on spine and back pain, which is a big thing in the community, but this is back to cardiac again. We've done mental health. Yep. Had a great one, Wayne Swash. I think you know Wayne. Yep. So Swatter.
Yeah, done a few events with him.
I had Swatter as a guest on one a couple of years back, and he was mesmerising for the audience the way he works. I've done a few things with Wayne with his pucker up.
Yep.
So but the women in the audience is what I was picking up on, because it's women need to. They're often are the big, that's assuming they want their men to hang around, of course, Ray.
Well, that's it. I mean, I get challenged a lot of the time. Why don't you care about women in the work that you do? It's like, well, it's about everyone. Men's issues are about everyone, especially if you look at suicide, and of every minute of every day in the world, another man kills himself. And of that, there's probably another 80 trying, at least. Yeah. They're leaving women, daughters. Yeah. It affects everybody. So, certainly love women. I am one. Need all the support I can get. So up next is Paula Hogg, and I can't see her in the studio yet, but she will be hosting a lazy Sunday afternoon, as I said. What's on for you for the rest of the day? Going to get your boys out of bed?
I'm hoping they're up when I get home, because they weren't when I left, Ray. So I've got my two boys there. So we were actually going to go perhaps to South Melbourne Market and have a look around at some of the produce and a bit of fun there. And I'm cooking a Jamie Oliver chook for dinner tonight.
Put a can of beer
Not one that he grew, but one of his recipes.
Put a can of beer up its bum. That's always a good one. I'm taking my number 2 son, not the runner, little Rory. He's 14. We're going to the classic car show at Moonee Valley.
Today?
We love. You might have seen my classic car out in the car park.
Well, the St Kilda Festival is on, so partly, it's such a hectic and big crowd, but it's a great day to go. So I might just wander down at 5 o'clock. I might go and have a beer with Rae at the Albert Park Hotel.
You
if she's there as
do.
well.
Compare notes
If Rae's
and
there.
say, did she beat you up as well? Like,
Who argued more, Rae, you or me? So,
all right. Well, look, thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Rae.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this, learning about you, Dr. Peter Larkins, and I know my phone is pretty much blown up, so I guess everyone else has enjoyed it as well. So you will, if you know anyone that wants to hear the show again, it will be produced